Live. Check, check. 1, 2. Check, check. 1, 2. I have to get a check here that we are live. And John, if you want to go ahead and pull up on YouTube if you're able to, because I do have some visual aids. Right. I almost said I have some aids for you, which I might. But yeah, you just keep the volume off on that. I'm making sure we're live right now. Okay, we look like we're live. And it'll be a little bit delayed, just so you know. Okay. Looks like we are good. How's the sound, everybody? Let me know. We see Kerri. I see Cardinal. What's up, brother? How's Australia? I'm coming. Aussie. Coming soon. So, let's see. I'm going to double check the sound, everybody. So you're going to hear a little bit of reverb. Sorry. So, let's see. Okay. We seem to be good. All right. What's going on, everybody? My name's Justin Thomas from Top Shelf Fandom. This is the first episode of How Blank Does Story. How story is done, but by a different storyteller every single week. This week, I'm happy to have John from Cortex Videos with me, and we're going to be discussing how Nolan does story. And we're going to be talking about his body of work as a whole, and just kind of breaking it down in a macro sense, since we have Tenet, the much anticipated film that'll be coming out. John, when is it coming out? What is the projected date?
July the 17th.
There we go. So trying to keep movies alive. So John from Cortex Vids, we had him on from Westworld. He has a very, very good channel. Actually has a degree in film and television, and it comes from the other side of the pond. So thanks for making time for us, John. Introduce yourself. Let everybody know where they can find you, and then we'll jump into Nolan. We'll start at the end credits.
Well, it's great to be back, Justin. I just want to say thank you for having me on before, and I'm really looking forward to discussing Christopher Nolan today, going through all of his filmography and how he tells story. And yeah, if you want to check out any of my other work on social media, including YouTube, you'll find me at Cortex Videos.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been covering Tenet quite extensively, and I know that you have a lot of information to give us about Nolan, and I'm excited because the Nolans are very interesting and intriguing and successful filmmakers, and the way in which they tell story is vastly different than others, but it is done in a way that seems to make a lot of money at the box office, as well as satisfy us intellectuals or pseudo-intellectuals, whatever, us craving a little bit more substance, not the Michael Bay film buffs. Nothing wrong with a good smash and grab, or 3 hours of explosion. Hey, if you can do it good, you can do it good, and he does. So Nolan was born in 1970. Just give you a little bit of a background on him. In London, he has had a dual citizenship since the beginning. His mother, I believe, was a flight attendant. His father was a London marketing rep, like a London Don Draper. And he has split his time between London and Chicago, or just right outside of Chicago in Illinois, since a small child. That's why you will notice Jonathan, the creator of Westworld, one of the creators, has a American accent, his younger brother, and he has a British accent for the most part. A little bit, not too hard of a British accent, but definitely can tell the difference between the two brothers and wonder how the hell they're related. It's because they split their time, and Chris spent more time in London. Also went to school there, and he went there for literature. He studied literature. He did not study film over across the pond. So he has a degree in the arts, I believe a master's, and he is a student of story and a master of story, as we will see. But it is interesting that this guy who is so just fantastic at crafting story from a technical sense and a just base level story sense of meaning, how to actually pose a story, how to put the framework in for your plot. Did not actually go to school for any type of production or any type of the technical things in which he does. He does have an uncle that works for NASA, so maybe it's just in the genes. And so speaking about how he goes about making films, just, big picture here, John, how do you feel that Nolan goes about making films? What makes him stick out?
Well, I think in regards to Nolan, there's two sort of categories that I like to see him work in. One is through his themes. The other is how he constructs his film for the audience. Starting off with the themes, I think everyone will obviously highlight this, the manipulation of time. Nolan always plays with time, whether it's the timeline of the story or the perception of time in the characters or by the characters in the story. Non-linear time frames, flashbacks, and time duration are essentially manipulated in almost every single one of his films. He always expects the audience to keep up with the timeline of events and treats his audience as intellectual filmgoers that will essentially catch up or figure out what is happening. The other thing he also does is he presents a genre within a genre. Nolan's earlier films were noir-based, and they, in themselves, fall into multiple film genres, from thriller to mystery, crime, and detective. When you look at how he treats the writing of his films, you understand that he doesn't assign his stories to a particular genre. So if you look at, for instance, The Prestige, he treated that like a period piece, even though it was a thriller, or even with science fiction elements. Even if you look at Inception, it was written as a high story within, elements of the science fiction and action setting. And then obviously The Dark Knight, which to many, including myself, is still the greatest superhero movie to this day, was written and shot like a neo-noir crime drama. And it was inspired by Michael Mann's Heat. The other final theme that he presents in his film is the emotionally damaged protagonist. All of Christopher Nolan's main characters, or the lead protagonists of his films, have some kind of traumatic experience or event that has shaped them into the person they have become. They are usually defined by this trauma and have a particular set of skills, and they will use them while devoting their life to reconciling with their past. Essentially, he tackles the memory of his characters who are lost in their own thoughts or thinking in the past. And these elements make the movie go in one way instead of the other. Even if, like in the case of Memento, we soon realize that the entire narrative is going backwards. And putting all of these themes together, just a last note, he takes the intellectual narrative themes of his films and he finds a way to still ground them in blockbuster, in the blockbuster landscape. I like to call him a blockbuster auteur because he focuses on concepts that you'd expect to see in a film like an A24 art film, but then he perfectly balances it with a level of high intensity action and the typical tropes that you would get in a large event film.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. It's spectacle alongside sentiment, and
Exactly.
as you said, it seems to be grounded. And there's something to be said for a filmmaker that can do what he's done in the way in which he's done it, because there's nothing wrong with that big Hollywood blockbuster spectacle. He doesn't use zoom lenses because he likes to put the camera very close if it's going to be close, the shot. So it's an intimate scene because the actor is going to act differently for that scene. He's a very practical and pragmatic film maker, but he also has, no zoom lenses and doesn't use green screens, but also has, jets with cameras on them on the nose cone. So, he also has there's, that NASA side from his uncle, maybe that displaying in there. So it's very, very intriguing. And I think he's had up to date 10 feature films, which we're going to cover, briefly. We'll go over the cliff notes for them. But they all deal with the same malleable sense of memory, sense of self, this metaphysical aspect that's always lingering in the background. And what makes you you? Why do people do the things they do? This sense of morality. And you see this all the way from The Following to his latest film with Dunkirk. Now, we'll talk about Dunkirk. It kind of sticks out for me when we get to it. That is a very interesting film in which he really showcases his chops by not having a lot of dialogue and letting the top part of the script that says exterior and gives you the actual description of what's happening tell the story. So, he is able to tell stories in very, immersive ways. And he just seems to know what works overall and does a really good job of attaching us to these protagonists who are deeply damaged and questioning their sense of self. And if it's not their sense of self, it's their sense of place within the world, which I find. So we'll start off with Following, which does... You've seen this film. Now, I am aware of the plot, so I'll let you take this one. This is one of the ones I have not seen, but I do understand that it deals with a burglar that is followed by one of the victims, or one of the first victims, that wants to imitate his behavior and ends up being kind of shammed and scammed himself.
Yeah. Well, I think this film, for me, personally really does highlight Nolan's blueprints as a filmmaker. He integrates his timeline structures, convoluted chronological structure through cross-cutting. He changes the protagonist's clothing, bruises on his face, even his hair during scenes to tell you that something's up with the time. But weirdly enough, the protagonist in this film is, or not the protagonist, sorry, the antagonist, I guess you could say for a majority of the film, is Cobb. His name is Cobb, and obviously, as we know in Inception, the name of the main character played by Leonardo DiCaprio is also Cobb. So, and I think like you were saying to me before the show about this Cockney kind of protagonist that he likes to present in all of his films, and I can see that. I can see that in all of his films. But really, he stripped himself back in following from in a story point, but also in a filmmaking point, where the cinematography was obviously to this black and white, color palette. He tried to capture a pure noir tone, which, as I say, with the genre thing, he integrated into all the other films he made, and The Dark Knight obviously being the most prominent of the examples. But Nolan in this film, really he crafted it. He was capturing the cinematography. He didn't have a cinematographer. He only had £4,000 to make this film that was saved up of his own money. He wasn't really backed by any studio. It was really all his doing until he started moving on to the bigger projects. But from a story point of view, I think Following really is. It really deals with the troubled protagonist that we feature in all of his other films. It starts with that base of this character who follows people around just to see what they do in their daily lives, where they're going, who they are as people. And as we start the film, we see the end essentially. So he does that Inception type effect, or even Memento.
Yeah.
And by the time we get on in the story, we realize that our protagonist may be as faltered as all the other characters that we meet.
Yeah, so you have a non-linear story frame, meaning not telling the story from beginning to end, starting at the end as Nolan likes to do. But he does this throughout almost all of his films in some way or another, and I'll get to Batman Begins, how this is even present there to an extent. But you see a lot of the themes in Following that you see throughout his movies, the questioning of self, what makes you you, especially with the Dark Knight connection of it's more of a sociological approach to what makes a society if we all desire the same consumer goods. We will, in theory, some philosophers will come to the conclusion that we will desire not just to have the same things or better things than other people, but to have their lives. And from what I'm getting from Following, that is definitely present within this film as well. And the noir, tone to it is a black and white take, high contrast, hard light, black and white, things are either good or bad, but beautifully done with showing you that things are not just good or bad. Everything is gray. So I have to get that on to into my schedule quickly right there. Definitely. But it's amazing. And I've heard people say that they'd like to see some money being taken away from Nolan for a film, or him to try to challenge himself and do a low budget film again to see what he can do. I that's just the narrative out there.
You might get that Oscar through that way.
He probably would, yeah. But I don't think the quality has dropped yet.
Always...
Yeah, and money is something he's going to want. So yeah, no, it is interesting as well when you have these crosscuts, as you said. For you guys that don't know, a crosscut is the crosscut in time. So say like with Memento, you have the color scenes, and then you have your black and white scenes. So he does it as I believe he calls it a thimble or a pin. It's just a I can draw it right on here. Go ahead and make yourself a little. If you probably can't see that, but yeah,
you could probably catch a famous video of Nolan explaining how he uses that kind
YouTube,
of structure with Memento, I believe it was. So yeah, it's a very good analogy of how he puts it. Very confusing, but once you understand it and get into how he uses that structure, it's
yeah. Here you go. So you got 1 point, 1 point, 1 point, 1 point. So you got your C down here, your B up here, and then you cross, and then the end is right here. So as you get to it, cross. So and go through it. So your ending is right there. So, and you can see my terrible mouse work right there. But yeah, it's it is giving you the perspective from our protagonist, because our protagonist is not cognitive of the situation themselves. They're confused, so we're confused, and I think that it does work out beautifully in that sense right there. So let me get myself back on screen here, and again, you got to really appreciate that he keeps going back to what works, and it's not necessarily the easiest way to tell a story, but it is one of the most effective ways. And why am I not going back on camera here? Let's get me back on cam, and then we will continue. Let's see. You guys get the live version. Congratulations. It's worth every bit. This should be good now. Don't understand why it wouldn't be, but let's do a double check. Zoom meeting mesh. There we go. All right. So we're back. So we move on to Insomnia, which is the first collaboration.
Memento.
I believe we have Insomnia before Memento, don't we? Or do we?
No, it's Memento before Insomnia.
Oh, my apologies. I left Memento off of my little thumbnail right there. So we will go to the actual list right here. In 1998, we have following. 2000, we have Memento. So we have Memento, and that's the story we were just talking about. This is a story about a gentleman that hit, I believe it's called the hippocampus part of the mind, has an injury. This gives you like perpetual amnesia, meaning every single day you wake up, you don't know what's happening. And he has a series of mementos in which he looks through to tell him what to do. But as we see with the unreliable narrators and the nonlinear storytelling and the questioning of oneself and the questioning of what is reality and what matters, which we see in Inception, we find out, spoiler alert, throughout this whole time, he's been lying to himself. These mementos are clues to what he should be doing, but they're clues left to him so he can live in kind of this state of bliss, because what he really did is not going to be something that he can live with. Any thoughts on Memento, other than it just being obviously such a great film and obviously the breakout film? Nobody knew about Following on a wide scope until Memento.
Yeah, I mean, Memento is obviously told. Manipulates time to tell the story in reverse, fully portraying the troubled nature of memory loss. We experience this straight through the eyes of Guy Pearce's Leonard, who, we see through different narrative structures, one of color, which is moving backwards in increments of time, and then obviously the black and white sequences are moving forwards until they eventually meet at the end of the film. And like you said, he uses Polaroids and tattoos, to constantly tell himself of these ideas of his past, which, he puts on his own body, he keeps in his pocket. We obviously get the famous line, "Don't believe his lies," with Teddy's character, which I thought was a great character in the film. Maybe they took, that Teddy and used his name in Westworld for the Teddy there. You never know with the Nolans. They like to reuse stuff, but doing it a different way, of course. But we are ultimately left on the question during this story of Memento of who does the manipulating, because we can't believe Teddy's lies. Is it Teddy or is it Leonard? We get this overarching sense that it's Leonard, and he's leaving all these mementos to kind of put him in, as you say, a constant what was the word you used?
Perpetual state of amnesia.
That's the one.
I get one every stream, you get the rest.
But is he fooling himself into not believing he's the killer? And I think that's the more probable. But the idea we get here from Christopher Nolan is that he likes rewatchability. He likes the audience to watch something, and if they think the story ends in this way, when they watch it again, they'll notice something else, and they'll think, "Oh wait, I have to question that."
Yeah,
and that's something that Inception did perfectly. But I think he laid the groundwork in Memento for that, brilliant ending.
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad that you brought that up, because I'm just stating what I take away from the film. But this is called hermeneutics, and it was hermeneutics, depending on whoever. Somebody will correct me later in the comments below for however they say it. But this is the analyzing of text, mostly a theological study, but a philosophy as well. And this is dealing with what Nolan does is not give us a definitive answer, just like Cobb doesn't wait for his totem to stop spinning because he just moves off to his family. Or does the totem matter at all? Because we're also led to believe that we can't use somebody else's totem, and that was his wife's totem, so his is his wedding ring. Is it all a dream? You know what I mean? But it doesn't take away from the meaning. And sometimes you guys that have been longtime watchers of my channel will know that I don't like deception for deception's sake. None of these films on this list, in my opinion, do that. The end of Memento leaves you not. I believe this, but it's not. That is a subjective view on it. It is not the objective fact. This finite thing because we very rarely in life get that, and I think he does it beautifully because he does it in a way that doesn't disappoint. In rewatchability, as John has just said. So yeah, Memento is definitely, obviously you see a lot of the foreshadowing again for what he's going to play with, because he is essentially doing what Cobb does at the end of Inception. He is maybe living in a state of ignorance and bliss, maybe not. We don't know. What is he picking? The shadows, the allegory of the cave. I said I wasn't going to bring this up, but it is very true. Do we decide to live in the shadows, or do we go out in the light? But the light blinds some people. So we will go on from there. So then after that, we have Insomnia, which is the first foray in connection to what I like to call the Warner Brothers connection, not to be derivative, but a very special relationship. One thing we see with Nolan is, especially once we get into the Warner Brothers films, we see a deep collaboration in a loyalty to the collaborations in which he makes, in which he forms. If he likes an actor, he sticks with them. If he likes a cinematographer, he sticks with them. If he likes a DP, a director of photography, he sticks with them. He left Hans Zimmer for The Prestige. He's never left him again. Any notes on Insomnia? I don't have too much on it other than this is his first film in which he did with Warner Brothers that connects him to the Batman series.
Yeah, it was really, as I was saying to you before the stream, I believe it was Steven Soderbergh. He was really the one who got Nolan through the door. Nolan was trying for a while to get through to Warner Brothers. That was essentially his dream studio. He wanted to do a Batman film. I mean, going back to Following, don't know if you've ever seen this shot anywhere, but there's a Batman sign on the protagonist's door. In his room. So it's kind of there. It's all, what he wanted to tackle. But Steven Soderbergh, told Warner Brothers that you really need to be looking at this guy because he's got some talent. And I think he can really bring Batman back to the forefront. And Insomnia really was that way to show the studio, look, this is what I've got for you. This is what I can bring you. I can take something that's been done, which, obviously Insomnia was based on the Norwegian film in 1997. I can take something that's been done and bring an original sensibility to it.
Yeah, and he's done a few adaptions, and he has an interesting approach to storytelling. I don't know, and I cannot find the exact information about him and his brother Jonathan's working relationship, other than it seems to me like he makes outlines, meaning Christopher makes an outline. Jonathan writes a story, probably that is more broad strokes, not like a novel, and then he adapts that story to a screenplay.
If I'm right, Memento was based on the short story by Jonathan Nolan.
Yes, it was a short story.
He is really the story guy there. But I think, pardon me, I think ever since, was it Dark Knight or Dark Knight Rises? Ever since The Dark Knight Rises, Christopher's really worked on his own now in the writing. I believe it was only Interstellar he co-wrote with Jonathan Nolan. But he's starting to go his own solo route in the writing and directing department, because obviously he's shown, with Inception, that he can do it on his own in terms of the writing and different aspects of production.
Yeah, absolutely. And it might be a fact that Jonathan has also found individual success, independent success. So,
exactly.
Chris can always do it. His degree is actually in literature, not filmmaking. He worked as a grip and a camera operator in really, because I'm not going to say his family had money, but they definitely weren't poor. He did work and grinded it out, from what it seems, as a script supervisor, which is somebody that, ironically enough, they guarantee continuity of story. Like if you have a bottle in your right hand at the end of a shot and you have to, continue on the next day, because you have to, the 12 hours are up. They make sure that bottle's in the right hand. So that he did that job on there. So yeah, I think it's interesting to see there. I would like to have and I've looked for it, any interviews with them that speak about their exact partnership. Maybe it's just none of my damn business, but I do find it interesting. So Insomnia is not one that really sticks out to me, other than it's just a fine film, and it really...
It has. I tell you what it does have is some great themes, though. I mean, for me, the themes and the performances are the things that stand out. I mean, don't get me wrong, Insomnia is probably the most... For me, it's the film that I rewatch the least of all of his filmography. But whenever I do put it on, I'm amazed by the performances by Al Pacino and Robin Williams. I think, the themes of guilt and obsession, both of which, along with, the midnight sun in the film, keep, Pacino's character from sleeping at night. And that's the themes of the film. They work their way, from the title into themes, into characters. And, Nolan's themes aren't as obvious, but he still interweaves them into it, like the troubled protagonist with Al Pacino. There's still elements of time kind of flashing before his eyes there. I think overall there's an emotional underpinning to the film that transcends what it means to be a good detective thriller. And even though Insomnia does not match the grandeur of his later pictures, I don't think it should be considered as like a lesser effort.
No,
it's just one of the less, I'd say, rewatchable of all of them.
He has 10 features. He has 10 features. This out of those 10, fantastic. All of them good. All of them good. Yeah. This seems like his kind of midway, his middle ground between the following and say, then the Prestige or Inception. Like he's kind of fitting more of a studio mold for this, I feel. But the themes are still there. I have no issue with it whatsoever. I watched the film once. It was a while back. I'll give it a rewatch, and I liked it. It's a fantastic film. Scale, you would probably praise it if it was one of Josh Trank's films or something like that, but he ain't Josh Trank, so I'd
honestly actually say it's one of Robin Williams' best performances. I think it's in his top 4 or 5, I would say,
which to get a good because we've seen in Good Will Hunting that what he's capable of, but it seems to take a certain type of director to bring that out. So that speaks for itself. So now the one for me, one for you type of situation. This is a saying in Hollywood that you do one for the studio, you do one for yourself. So John spoke before the stream. This is a problem with talking way too much before the stream, especially when I'm stressed out. But you brought up that Soderbergh was kind of the connection here. Insomnia is with Warner Brothers, but really he gets the Batman series, the franchise, into his hands with influence of Soderbergh, because that's one hell of a property to give to somebody that when you look at his body of work, it's fantastic, but it is for the most part very much an indie level, even Insomnia of production. So to give such a large franchise to somebody speaks a lot. So who knows what was happening behind the scenes? You seem to be a little bit more privy to that than I am, but we do know that he is looking to do the Prestige, which I love, and I think is just like how Quentin Tarantino has a love letter to the 1970s Hollywood. This is a love letter per se to filmmaking. The magicians are the director; they are the screenwriters in the Prestige. But we do know that he was getting one for him, that was Prestige, and one for the studio. But he definitely took Batman Begins very seriously, because a day before he's getting on a plane to go do locations, to site locations for the Prestige, he got off, or didn't make the flight, and said, I'm not going to be able to give what Batman deserves if I try to do these films too close together. And he focused on Batman Begins. And I think it's interesting to take note when I was looking back at the structure, the framework of the plot of Batman Begins. It's interesting because, number one, he spends half the movie not Batman. And I think a lot of people consider this film, besides The Dark Knight, to be the best Batman film other than The Dark Knight. In most cases, it is a fantastic film. Also, there is a non-linear framework in there as well, because you have tragedy with the, how many times we have to see Batman's parents get killed, but it is in every film.
He found a way to make it work.
He did. This is one of the best. You do need that in there. But then it jumps to him as an outlaw over in Asia. And then you have your cross-cutting back to him with Katie Holmes at this point, not Maggie Gyllenhaal, but you get what I mean? So you actually, the norm is not him being normal. It is showing how he couldn't survive acting as a regular person in society after this. And the more steady story, the more, your flow goes more criminal, cut back to little just like vignettes of him with Katie Holmes, him, trying to deal with adulthood and being a normal person, being Bruce Wayne. And most of it is him after he did all that, going over and learning how to be Batman in a very, for the most part, realistic way. I remember watching the film as a younger man and being like, oh, it seems like that could really happen. Could it really happen? I don't know. Probably not to that extent, but they make us believe. And it's a very grounded way to tell this story. But again, is not giving us a linear storyline. And I did not catch that I was like 20 something when I watched it. But upon rewatch and I was looking at the plot, I was looking at diagrams. I was like, oh, he jumps in this too. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
he's jumping in this too. That's not the norm.
He's still showing them traditional themes. It's, for me, the key to understanding this tone and this presentation in Batman Begins is what Nolan screened to the cast before the Batman Begins came out, and that was Blade Runner.
Yes,
he took a neo-noir approach on a Batman film. He took classic elements of a detective thriller, combined that with a superhero origin that most people were used to in that decade, with lots of superhero origin films and trilogies, I guess you could say. And he fused the two into this story of showing Bruce Wayne, really evolve into this character. And I think what you pointed out there was brilliant about how half the movie he's not even, Batman. Most of the movie, I'd say, is only
it's definitely over half the film until you see him in a bat suit.
Yeah, and it just shows you how great he is as a filmmaker to really take his time to convey a story. He doesn't rush elements. He doesn't take he even doesn't take the traditional approach. I don't think he does have a 3-act structure in most films, but he mixes it around with these time jumps, as you say, to really make the audience grow into the character, grow into the story, grow into the direction the film's going in, where things are going. And I just think it works perfectly. I mean, I'd put Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises equal. I mean, I know a lot of people would say Batman Begins and Dark Knight at the top, Dark Knight Rises at the bottom. I think this whole trilogy, it just feels to me, whenever I watch it, complete.
Yes.
It's a beginning, a middle, and an end. It really does feel like a complete trilogy with 3 individual different types of filmmaking. Batman Begins being the superhero origin, The Dark Knight being the post 9/11 film about terrorism and real world consequences, and then The Dark Knight Rises being that war film, that epic conclusion.
Yeah, and it's important to take note that he did structure this, not to get ahead of ourselves here, but this was not an easy thing. No. Don't ever apologize. I love that for stuff like that. No, I have to keep myself on track because I really want to touch on what you just said there. It's important to take note that this is not Lord of the Rings. This isn't, the Fellowship of the Ring that is a single, story that is then converted into 3 films or cut into so many books, like A Song of Ice and Fire, blah, 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 one story, not complete yet, but, 7 books, potentially. So, you don't have, you have a beginning, middle, end as you laid out. You have the origin, you have then the, the climax of its height of power, meeting his greatest nemesis, and then you have the decline in The Dark Knight. So he was really struggling, because how many franchises have a great third movie that aren't a film that is based off a story that just needs 3 movies to tell? These are 3 separate, these are episodic stories in a sense because it's a comic book story. So, there's a lot of different iterations of it. But going back to, which you just have to really admire that Batman Begins, the faith in which he has in his audience is just as important as the faith in which he has in himself. And he has to have both. He doesn't hold your hand during stories. For him not to give Batman his suit until halfway through the film, man, how many freaking notes did he get from lawyers slash
I
producers.
wonder how he convinced Warner Brothers.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
They're lawyers. They make money. They're like, where's Batman? Where's, they're not really they're necessary
I
people.
mean, I
But
don't know if you saw the trailers and the TV spots for Batman Begins before it was coming out, but it was
them.
so weird watching them. There were some TV spots with like rock music, and it just didn't fit the tone of the film. But he was able to sell it, and people went and saw it, and then were like, wow, I didn't expect this from a Batman film. 10 years after one of the worst superhero films we've seen.
Yeah, and I want to go look up those spots now, because they definitely probably contracted that out to a trailer house. He definitely probably didn't have his hands on those then. A marketing team is like, how do we sell this fucking crazy stuff? Batman's not even Batman.
That's a great point as well about marketing. I mean, over the time, he's gained more of a foothold in the marketing, because every trailer you see has that traditional format, from Christopher Nolan, the director of blah, 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 and then obviously the cutscene after the title card on the trailer.
Yes.
Similar. Inception and Tenet both have a similar ending scene to their trailers, obviously, with Inception having the "Don't be afraid to dream a little bigger, darling," and Tenet having the plane. I forgot what the quote was now, but it was Robert Pattinson, John David Washington with a plane crash. A very similar sort of essence there.
And he's keeping up this not telling you what the story's about, which in a time where the world, the old, even 90s, early 2000s fashions, I've done an evolution of the trailer. The old, there used to be a company that just did the trailers for originally the theaters did the trailers, and then there was your standard Hollywood trailer. I'm forgetting the name of the organization at the time that did all the marketing, but yeah, like it was literally to tell you what the story was. So again, they have faith that people are going to go see a Nolan film because they want to see what it's all about, not to see what happens in pre-existing anticipation or expectation about a specific story thread. A man that's lost everything and must find the love of his life. That's not it. It's like, what the fuck is happening here? This looks intriguing. Let's see what happens. And by the end of the film, if it sticks to Nolan, first off, we'll see finally the title. When it fades to black, which I think is awesome. It's always, you don't see the title to the end of the film. It's little things like that get me.
For me, the Batman Begins was the film that very much it didn't just put trust within the studio towards Nolan, but the audience. I mean, it took him from doing films. I mean, don't get me wrong, Memento, Insomnia made really decent amounts of money. I believe they were all successful at the box office, but Batman Begins really did heighten. He got the global audience to, put their eyes on him as a filmmaker, not just Batman as a property, but him as a filmmaker. But really, that's where The Dark Knight comes in. That's when he really solidifies that, I think.
Yeah, I think it might have given him confidence as well, because one last thing on the story structure for that. If you think about it, it's not just him dicking around and being like a just loose with storytelling and keeping to this non-linear. What is more, because a normal story is, okay, this tragedy happens as a kid, that's the catalyst for his change. He cannot adapt to normal life. This is, his parents are dead. He feels a sense of shame, responsibility, blah blah blah. So they would just go linear with that. But we get it. We get that if your parents died, you would have this remorse. You would maybe even start to blame, as you become an adult, a strong man or a strong woman. You would feel like, maybe I should have done something. All of this, like we that's inherently within us. So he is focusing on the evolution of the Batman in the training and all that, not all this gloomy glumpster. I can't do college. You know what I mean? But that is the go-to if you're going to tell a story. So he's like, I only need this here and there, like a few drops of it, and that's it.
All of these, this build-up of Bruce Wayne in Batman Begins, his evolution as a character, all comes back around as well when we get to Rises. They replay scenes in that film. Yep. Whether it's Liam Neeson as Ra's al Ghul, telling him in the cellar there, I believe it's the prison cell at the start of the film, that you must become something more. You must become legend.
Yes. And
what do we do when we fall? We pick ourselves back up. The Michael Caine stuff. It's all there, and it works in that film as its own film. But then later on down the line, he replays that. He uses time again to replay these shots, to replay these brilliant moments of character development to convey the passing of how Bruce Wayne's gone from this kid, who then grew up to, see his parents be killed and nearly diverted into crime, to eventually not go that path and become a vigilante that saves people without knowing who he is, until they do know who he is, of course.
Yeah.
Or maybe Commissioner Gordon, like you said to me about that quote,
Yes. The grounded
it
is but let's look it up because it's very, very impactful, and I think it beautifully
summarizes the trilogy, really.
Yes, it showcases how he was able to take a grounded approach to this story, because and Gordon says it right in there. Let's see, I got it here.
Something about putting a coat around a young boy's shoulders.
Yeah. Hold on. Okay. So it is. There was a quote. I thought I had it. Hold on. Here. Okay. And this is live, people. Sorry. Come on. Okay. A hero can be anyone, even a man doing something as simple as reassuring as putting a coat around a little boy's shoulders to let him know the world hadn't ended. So a hero can be anyone, even a man doing something simple and reassuring as putting on a coat around the little boy's shoulders to let him know that the world had not ended. So, it's just...
and Batman says that to him in Rises as well, as he's about to go off in the chopper to take away the nuclear device. It really, what I was saying about things coming full circle, he does that. He makes things work for the individual movie, he presents it as its own thing, its own genre within a genre, like I was saying before. And then as we get to that final film, he built up such a great character that was memorable to the audience that he can reuse some of these quotes in different contexts, and with different characters saying them to really, make this journey feel complete, make it feel like a complete story from beginning to middle to end.
To remember his resilience, because those are his own words that he's repeating back to him, at a weakened state. He was empowered when he gave them, now he's weakened, Gordon. So, he gives him back his own words to breathe youth back in. Exactly. And it's brilliant because, again, and we'll move on, you don't need, an origin story usually pertains, really just survives off of like this whole, this is this person, oh, how did they become this, and it's like, this grinding it out of his college years and all this. You just need the catalyst for change. You need those little breadcrumbs. So it's smarter that he spent the time with the action, and it's showcasing his understanding of high concept storytelling, what's entertaining and what's meaningful. So he does it without sacrificing substance. And then we have The Prestige, which, this is I do one for you, I get one for me. This is one of his least liked films. I really like this film. A lot
of people absolutely love this film. They say it's their favorite Nolan film.
It's one of the, it's polarizing.
It's in my top 5. It's right in the middle of my list. But every time I watch it, it's similar to Inception in a way. Every time I watch it, it gets better. But there's certain aspects to it that I do think, similar to Insomnia, I think could have been, in terms of theme, very, very much felt like he went away from his traditional formula, and he tried something different. But like I think you were saying about his love for movie making, I think like Inception, The Prestige is like that. It's very much about the love for filmmaking, about magic, how you can present something on screen and make an audience believe it's real.
And if they saw how it was really done, they'd want to keep
yes, exactly. That's
so
just what I was just going to say.
Yeah, it is. The sentiment of the film is what drives it for me.
Really, yeah.
Thematically and aesthetically, he did a lot of things. He didn't have Hans Zimmer with him. He had
David Julian, I believe, was the composer he worked with, and that was from, I think he did Memento, but I think it was David Julian. And then he moved on to Zimmer as we came into Dark Knight.
Yeah, it's just
Batman Begins.
Stylistically, he does a lot of things. He uses natural light a lot more, which is, I think, actually, it's pretty cool because things were darker back then. They didn't have electricity, blah blah blah. But I could see why aesthetically some people wouldn't like the tone of it, because really you have tone of color. the way in which something is lit, and then you have tone within your music are usually the biggest aspects of visual mediums that people will be turned off by, whether they're conscious of it or not. But subconsciously, the score and the lighting scheme is really going to make you feel one way or another. So I think that's where the movie does kind of falter. But yeah, no, it is. I recommend it for anybody, especially people that are interested in storytelling, and this really, I do feel like, is a love letter of sorts to filmmaking, or homage to it.
It really is. The one theme he has in there that's in all of his films, again, is identity. But there's other themes of obsession, sacrifice, rivalry, obviously between Hugh Jackman's Angia and Christian Bale's Borden, I believe it is. But yeah, Christian Bale's Borden obviously has a twin brother in the film that we see throughout the entire film, and you can clearly see it looks a bit like Christian Bale, but you don't go that far. You don't believe he's going to do something like that. There are times when I first watched that film, I was like, is that Christian Bale? But I didn't quite fully catch on to it, because he really does cut between him very quickly, his twin brother. But we realised that obviously Fallon, the mysterious character with Borden, was the twin brother. But the question we're left on at the end of the film, and that's what I think really stands out from The Prestige, the ending. Are you watching closely? That's the tagline. And that ending solidifies what actually happened. And the question we're left on is, how does Hugh Jackman's Angia perform the transporting man? We know that Christian Bale has the twin brother, but we don't quite know about Hugh Jackman. That's the sense of the magic there. But one of the interesting things that a lot of people I've noticed have said, that I've looked up information on the film, because it's one of them films that every time I watch it, I feel like I'm missing something. And I like films like that because they grow on me over time. And one of the pieces of information that a lot of people say is that Borden is Tesla and Angia is Edison. And if you look at the comparisons in the film, Nicholas Tesla creates a form of electric energy called, I believe it's AC,
it's alternating current.
And Thomas Edison brings out the similar but inferior DC, direct current. Both men battled to win over England, each claiming their methods were superior. And then you look at the two main characters in the film,
and Edison
very much relates to that.
Edison kills to try to prove how dangerous AC could be. So yeah, then there's a tie-in there for, if you got rid of a brother or not. So yeah, I think that there's a historic...
You can correlate that.
Yes.
To the two main characters a lot.
Absolutely. And this is, a first taste of him using maybe a little bit of historical context, which, we'll get to when we have Dunkirk, but little flavors of it. And this is a film that he'd been wanting to do for a while. Inception is really, which we're going to get to in a moment here, is really like his dream project, in which he had been...
For me, that's his... I'm trying to think. Stanley Kubrick's big film was 2001.
Yes.
And a lot of people would say it's Interstellar or Inception. For me, it's Inception. It was the movie that got me into movie making, wanted to get into the industry. I completely love film, but we'll get onto that, obviously.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say that it's, as far as his passion went, he had been, from what I've seen, really, working on Inception for so many years, that if it's not your child, it's his child. It's like where his passion was. It's like what he was waiting for. So, but before he can do that, he does The Dark Knight, and we all know that that's with Heath Ledger. Sadly, one of the last films in which he is in. Again, a really good out of the box way of thinking. The methodology is present. The trust in the audience is present. Really showcasing a very keen insight to what Batman as a character, at least how he sees him, and I think many people agree. Batman is one of those superheroes that are, if done correctly, and why Nolan fits it so well, because it's not, there's that old joke in Justice League, which won't get into it, just didn't care for it, of what superpower do you have? He goes, I'm rich. So it is not a story, in all fairness. It is easy to keep it grounded to some extent because he doesn't get struck by lightning and can fly, or nuclear waste doesn't turn him into the Thing, or blah, blah, blah. But we see an instance of the psychology behind the Joker in Batman. And if you're a fan of story, you're going to love what the Joker represents and what Batman represents. The unstoppable force meets the immovable object. This weird misplaced sense of morality that you've placed for not killing people keeps me alive, and the Joker's reason isn't as good, but you're just too much fun. So but it's fantastic, and it's so unfortunate that Heath was obviously unable to come back. I think that the last film would be drastically different. Obviously, I think it would have featured him for sure, and that we did lose out there, but we got such a great performance. And again, he uses the noir because Batman is a detective. He's the world's greatest detective.
I think that's what they're focusing on a lot with the new 2021 film. They're going full detective route with it. But I think Nolan's film, it was more of I think what came across as the detective nature of the film and the noir segment was how he constructed Gotham in the film. I think that was really what came across. And as I was saying about Blade Runner, how they were able to construct that city in the film, very much it conveyed the genre of noir. And he did that with Gotham. But he took the modern approach to it. As I said, a neo-noir is taking like old filmmaking techniques and lighting and tone and putting new filmmaking into that, modernizing it in today's landscape.
Yeah, it comes, Chicago is the model instead of Manhattan. This city that has this criminal, seedy history of, Capone and it's called the outfit. The outfit is the organized crime outfit that Capone starts, and then Frank Nitti and so forth continue it on. And so there's this seedy history of Chicago, this city that is ran by organized crime to one extent to another throughout, up until like the 70s. So, he uses that criminal underbelly in that cosmopolitan surface level. And yeah, you definitely get that noir feel. It's an escape from Schumacher's, not neo, it's neon lights instead of neo noir. I don't really.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, it just kind of came out, but yeah,
neon noir.
Yeah, neon noir. I don't know what it's supposed. It looks like a
great
circus.
Genres.
Yeah, it's like a circus, man. But it is what it is. He gave it, and you could see how he approached it. Schumacher said, "Hey, it's a circus. I'll make a circus." Nolan said, "Well, who is Batman?" And we get it. So I think that it's kind of been beat to death, The Dark Knight, and rightfully so, though. There's not a lot more to say about it other than we all know it's fantastic for the most part, and it really dives into that morality of how far are you willing to be pushed before you push back and you become the villain. You live long enough.
The Two-Face.
So
of course.
Yeah, I'm not minimalizing it or saying it. I just
of course.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like, what more to say?
Nolan's like that himself. He does like audiences reading into his work, but as a director, he's always focusing on the key aspects. With Interstellar, it was the relationship between a father and a daughter, and a lot of people like to go really in depth into that film. And don't get me wrong, I can understand why. I mean, it deals with very high concepts, but you have to keep to, what is this story about? And the story is about a father and a daughter. Same with, Batman, as you perfectly outlined before, what the story's about and how he's been able to construct this over 3 films. For me, when I look at The Dark Knight, it's really does talk to the period it came out in, and I think all of his films do this in some way, but The Dark Knight really does stick out in that filmography. And what I'm trying to explain is 9/11 was a tragic event at the start of that decade, and Nolan, if you look at the poster for The Dark Knight, obviously the whole film is littered with references to it, but the poster for The Dark Knight is Batman standing in front of a burning bat symbol in the side of a huge skyscraper. And that sticks in people's minds. When they see that, it's, a brilliant poster, but when they see that, it relates to them. And then when they watch the film and you see how the Joker's this terrorist, but one we don't quite understand. And, why is he doing this? Why is he doing all of these things? We don't know his backstory. In the film, we don't know in any of the iterations apart from obviously the newest Joker that came out last year, which I thought was a brilliant film as well. But yeah, it really is a testament to the time. Dunkirk was obviously, I like to call it the Brexit movie.
Yes.
So, there's lots of references there. He makes movies in time frames that they feel right to come out in.
Yeah,
You
like
know,
I'm trying to look up because it's Jack Bauer 24. I did the interview with the gentleman that wrote the book on it. 'Cause he also wrote
oh, I
Why
love
You Better
24.
Call Saul, and it's the I'm forgetting the Chow of Jack Bauer. I'll remember it. It's Stephen Kelsowitz. A great guy. But anyways, he wrote a book about the first sitcom after the first procedural situational series after 9/11, which was 24, and he compares the differences, he compares and contrasts from before 9/11 to after. And you're absolutely right, because there's plenty of context within the Dark Knight that lead us to believe that the Joker maybe was an interrogation expert in in over in Iraq.
Military. That was the guess.
Yeah, he has. So there's all these little breadcrumbs, but again, in classic Nolan way, but in a classic way,
Doesn't reveal them.
but it's fine because it's better.
Of course, it works.
Yes, because that is a thin line. That is a thin line that I think
Joker is that character.
Yes,
it is the character of the you don't know where this guy's come from. All you know is what he's doing now. And it's just, he's so unpredictable.
He gives different stories every single time for why he was cut. Oh no, I got these scars. Blah blah blah. It's the Tau of Jack Bauer. His name, the Tau. I think, and I forget what the Tau means, but they're just right on point. Yeah, it's no reason why he can't make it. Because you can't help but to tell stories that reflect what's happening in your own life. And after 9/11, I mean,
and that's the thing. The end of the Dark Knight, Batman loses.
Yeah.
But he picks himself back up. That theme again that we get. He picks himself back up, and we see that final shot of him driving into the night, ready to try and solve what's just gone wrong. And we get that kind of conclusion in The Dark Knight Rises. And really, he finds out that it's finding himself, finding who he is, and what this world of crime has turned him into. As I see the Dark Knight trilogy, it's about a grey character.
Yes.
And I know I've mentioned this. I like you mentioned a lot with. I forgot the word you were using earlier on. Oh, about the cave theory.
Allegory.
I do that with grey characters.
Yeah.
I do that so much. I mention it to death. But yeah, I think Batman's a grey character. He's one who could have become the villain, but he chose not to. And he's pushed in points of his life
You went
out of that.
Yeah, and you see... Oops, sorry, you went out. Go ahead.
Nope, hello.
Are you back? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. And when he has to play the villain, he does. At the end, he's determined to be the villain because they need their white knight, per se. So, yeah, I think that, The Dark Knight really, it touches, again, on morality. There's a little bit of those themes even from Following, with imitation. And I think it was called The Intimidation Game or something. That was the working title. Hey, stop analyzing working titles, dummies. Yeah, those are covers for what the story
cool
is.
Fact.
Yeah, cool fact.
Tenet's working title is Merry-Go-Round.
There you go. Analyze that, fellas, on YouTube. Yeah, making more videos telling everybody about how much you know about filmmaking, and we're analyzing purposely deceptive working titles to get people off their tail. I've seen that time and time again. Good work, pal. Yeah, so let's move on to Inception, which is dealing with, again, this idea of time, this idea of, it is this, I'd say, what would be the correct word? It deals with the metaphysical, right? It deals with morality and the metaphysical, what is real, what again, the allegory of the cave and so forth. But it is a caper. He forms this very high concept, dream-esque story into this caper with another Cobb character, little Cockney, and I forget, I'm terrible with names. I'm blanking on Tom Hardy, but
Eames.
Oh,
Eames.
He is so Cockney, right? Like that fits.
Oh, he so is, yeah.
Sometimes you got to dream a little bit bigger, beautiful. Yeah, and then darling. Yeah, it's just I can't do the thing, but yeah, it sounds cool when he says it. It would sound weird when I say it, just like it just did. But yeah, I the idea of this film and this guy that's gone down a bad path, a flawed protagonist, but we all understand why, and we empathize with this character because he's a character that has been driven by love for his family and his spouse, and he does put other people at danger though for that. And I think it's pretty beautifully laid out, because this movie could have been easily a film about people explaining how, like a South Park episode explaining about how Inception like works, and with Emma
Thomas.
Well, that's Chris's wife, but Emma, who she played Juno, Page.
Oh, Ellen Page.
Ellen Page, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Her character is a perfect audience surrogate when they bring in a new architect, and he does it intelligently. What I'm saying is this movie had to be just a bundle of issues, you know, to really format, because of how just, you know, complex it really is. And I know it's gotten some heat after it, but I mean, come on, it's a fantastic film, and all of these very complex ideas and metaphysical ideas, you know, really came together perfectly, and we understood at every point, every level, what was happening. And I think it's a masterpiece. And again, does this mostly with practical film, as you would say, not practical filmmaking,
practical effects.
Yeah, practical effects. You know, he is, of course, there is CGI in this, and he always uses CGI, visual effects.
He enhances it, doesn't he? Yeah.
Yes, he enhances CGI. It. In obviously a city wasn't folding, but you know, he builds. he builds. Maybe it was. We'll find out. No,
I think what he did for that is he filmed actual cityscapes, and then he turned that using he manipulated the film footage essentially to make it look. Yeah.
And you know, we have the turnstile hallway, in which he's got two airplane hangars full of sets. You know, it's amazing.
Favorite action scene of all time.
Oh,
the
absolutely.
corridor sequence.
In these dream sequences, could it very easily looked cartoonish, and they aren't. You know, every single level is just like another. And I've heard this, you know, connection a lot, but it speaks truth. And there's probably not a coincidence that Bond Casino Royale was rebooted right after, I believe, The Dark Knight, right around there. You know,
I did get very similar vibes in them first three Bond films. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I felt I was alone in that department. No. If anything, Skyfall is The Dark Knight if you look at the plot.
Yes.
I mean, it's very similar in tone.
I just don't know if Nolan is. I know that Nolan loves the Bond franchise, and it seems like some people will say that he was like throwing his hat into the ring with Inception, especially, you know, for the Bond reboot. And I find it hard. It's like, just give him Bond already.
I mean, he spoke to the Bond producers from time to time about doing it. He's come out and said he spoke to Broccoli, or I'm forgetting the Sony manager's name, or the one who does 007, of course. But he has spoke to them. He's come out and said that in the past. But you know, now he's moving on. He's doing his own spy movie.
Yeah.
It has to be exciting to, you know, see an original spy movie come to the fold, because no one's really, you know, James Bond is the spy movie, unless you're talking about Mission Impossible, of course.
Yeah, no, yeah. Well, I mean, they're fine, but they're not the same. But in Inception, you have a cue. You have and also in Inception, you also have, again, an homage. You know, you tell stories about what you know. He knows about filmmaking. You have your producer, which is I always blank on names, but it is his partner, Joseph
Gordon-Levitt.
Joseph Gordon-Levitt.
Every role in Inception is essentially a film role.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every single. You have the actor with Tom Hardy. You know what I mean? You have the scene, the set builder with Ellen Page, or the, you know, whatever you want to, maybe even director. But you know, yeah, it totally just fits all those parts. But it's also very much a thriller, especially in the snow level. You know, that is just almost in tone and in story a Bond ending.
That's took right out of On Her Majesty's Secret Service.
Yeah.
That scene, literally.
Yeah.
So like you said, he's showing his homage to Bond films. He's crafting a film about making movies. Essentially, the dream is the movie, and all the actors within that dream, or all the roles or cast in that dream, are roles of a production.
Yes.
You know, he's showing the audience how, and you know, general audiences won't pick this out if they only watch the film once. But obviously those who do rewatch the film and have, you know, are fans of Nolan, fans of that film in particular, it's the rewatchability where you pick these things out every time. There's always another layer to Inception with the ending. I don't know if you know about this. I don't want to spoil it for you, but the ring Have you heard about Cobb's ring?
Yeah, that's his
Ending?
totem.
Yeah.
I mentioned it actually earlier. Like we don't know if that, because you're not supposed to use another person's totem. If that was Mal's totem that he's using,
Yeah.
which it was the top, then that doesn't even matter. And the ring is on his hand when he is talking to Alfred. I can't think of names today.
I can't think of Michael Caine's name in that, actually.
There you go, Michael. You just
Is it
said
Hopper? Is it Hopper, or am I thinking another thing? Not sure.
Yeah, but yeah, you have like constants, and you have like little like what I call them like watermarks or whatever, like to try to like watch Westworld enough, you try to figure out what's happening where in constants, and then a variation from that. But his ring is when it's on is supposedly when he's in the real world, and so forth. So again, is left up to the imagination. And we also see another example from The Prestige. Like they say, if they knew what we were doing for real, they'd kill us. If the subconscious figures out if you start manipulating too much, they attack you. So it's all about the the suspension of belief. But if they start,
this is what crafts an auteur.
Yes.
This is how he's done this over multiple films. He's planted these seeds that he introduced in Following very briefly, and as we go film upon film upon film into his filmography, you start to see them. You start to see everything there, whether it's the similarities in ending, whether it's what was the example you were just giving about
the suspension of disbelief, and if you start to see the strings on the puppet, people become an angry mob.
Yeah. Themes, of course, there's so many similarities, and I saw that just through watching the Tenet trailer, and I know we're going to get to that later on, but while we're on the point of that discussion,
absolutely.
In the Tenet trailer, as I said, like the cutscene after the title cards, you've got that scene that reminds you of Tom Hardy and JGL's scene in Inception.
Yeah.
You've got obviously the car flip scene, which looks to be the new corridor sequence of that film.
Yes.
There's so many little seeds that he plants in his films that aren't exactly the same. They're different. He explores it through different themes and a different storyline.
It's not rinse and repeat.
They're tactics that he uses to convey his filmmaking to the audience time and time again, so that if you've watched one Christopher Nolan film and it works for you, the others may work as well. Because it's got these, little essences that bring a bit of flavor to his filmmaking.
Exactly, like we were talking about, it is a palette that we have for film, and meaning your taste buds, and these ingredients are, there's some paprika in there, there's a little bit of salt here and there, a dash of blah blah blah, and but it's not like the same meal, just like it's not just like a chopped hamburger, or Salisbury steak. It's it's in there, and it works on such a meta level and such a philosophical, like layered level, like that make you really think about, like, just again, not just filmmaking, but how we all put on a mask per se, and all this, we won't get all into, but that's the reason the things that he reuses aren't there in this very simplistic, like, rinse and repeat fashion. They have deeper layers to them, psychologically, philosophically, and that's why they're able to work time and time again, because they're not just being rehashed. They are present within story because they're present within our life. So you can't just say, I already did this in this story, because every single story happens within our life, so it has to have a lot of the same aspects in it, because those are relatable, and I think
that's why he keeps it to filmmaking cues rather than the actual story in general.
Yes.
Even though themes are very present in multiple stories he does, it's really the filmmaking that he tends to you see similar aspects there, but he always improves on his last film. For instance, Interstellar had about 60% IMAX, I believe, 60 or 70, and then Dunkirk obviously ramped it up to 80. Obviously, you can only film a certain amount with IMAX cameras, but he did ramp it up. He's ramped it up from film to film, so he's always looking at ways to heightening what he does, making it a bit better upon the next film.
Absolutely, the spectacle alongside of the sentiment and the the actual core of the film. And those IMAX cameras, it started off in the first film, I'm pretty sure he could probably only film 10 minutes at a time.
Yeah, I mean, The Dark Knight didn't have much IMAX, but the scenes we got that IMAX were brilliant. The truck flip, the bank robbery scene.
It can only feed in cartridges. Now they can do, I think, up to an hour, but that's just recently, and they're loud as hell. So they usually, back in the day, they could only be used for action scenes mostly.
Which is, exactly. That's why they use dialogue
Yeah.
on,
Your sound design has to be crazy. Get it's like pop, 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 pop. I think it's like a fucking gun. It's like a but it really is. I mean, the cartridges are just popping into it. So it's very simple. It's a huge piece of film that's just being slammed into what could be considered a machine gun of sorts to get those shots. So yeah, then we go into what is probably the most it probably has the least critical acclaim and audience acclaim as well, which is The Dark Knight Rises. In all fairness, I think that situation and circumstance played, the dice weren't really rolling in his direction for this one. Tragedy with Ledger and so forth. I know that they wanted Leonardo DiCaprio to come in and play the Riddler. And he wanted more of a mirroring of Batman, which turned into Bane. He saw, and he did his research within the comics. Bane is the physical force that breaks, Batman's back. He's already hobbled from all of the, because Batman is always a man, so he makes sure to show the physical abuse and strain which he's taken over the years. Again, it's in all fairness, this isn't a 3-movie series in which they're telling one story. This is 3 films that take place in the same universe, and he made a beginning, middle, and end. Obviously, I think there's some issues with this film, but I don't think it's nearly as bad as some people say it is. I don't think it's bad at all. I think that there's a lot of things that, and he did not want to do this. And if you have to end a story, it's one of the hardest things to do. Number one, starting a story and ending a story, the middle's, that's when you're just saying what happens, not that, at the end you got to say how everything wraps up. At the beginning you got to set everything up. So it sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's also very, very difficult to end a story, especially if you're going to tell everybody that Batman's going bye-bye in a satisfactory way. You know what I mean? So it's like, this popcorn-esque series in the past until he got his hands on it, and now people want to see emotionally, they want to see cinematically, thematically, blah blah blah, where this character goes. I think for the most part, again, it embodies a lot of the post 9/11, like you brilliantly brought up earlier, themes. And I think that Bane, obviously it's better than the other Bane iterations. I'm not a huge comic book fan, but I obviously if the Joker would have been available for it, I think that you would have had a lot better chance of having just another critically acclaimed as well as successful. Even though in the box office it did make money, I went to see it in the movies. Now that I'm thinking about it, but yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts overall on it? I think that it's doing the best you can with a not ideal situation. Oh, even if you had the Joker, I don't think this is an ideal situation.
No, I mean it was always the Dark Knight was a film that no one expected, and it literally I can't think of anyone when that film came out that I spoke to who was into the trilogy, was into filmmaking, that even said they didn't like it. Everyone loved really the Dark Knight. There are people who don't like it, and that's fine. Films are subjective, everyone has their own opinion, but the Dark Knight was a film that for a majority of people everyone loved and considered it a classic, one of the great superhero films. To come to The Dark Knight Rises, it was always going to be a mammoth task to just capture a film that was as high. I thought he did a great job. I mean, don't get me wrong, I put The Dark Knight ahead of it, but The Dark Knight Rises was a great final film. He ended the trilogy as I think as safe as he possibly could by returning to Batman Begins, as we said when we were going over that film, about his journey and where he's come. We have obviously the time flashback sequences with Ra's al Ghul and stuff. He turned Gotham into a war setting.
In a tale of two cities.
Snow on the ground.
Well.
It's very cold color palette. Everywhere's abandoned in the back part of that film. Bane looks like a military leader in how he dresses, how his posture is. It was his war film in the Dark Knight trilogy. That's how I see it. It's a war epic.
It's when push comes to shove, and a little bit of his literary background comes into play here with A Tale of Two Cities being injected into your theme, your story. It's a very much so mirroring, that classic, which is, I think he had to look at it and think, how can I make this have some substance? And, so he injects a little bit of one of the classics in there. And what you're dealing with is when push comes to shove, is when everybody's sick of it on both sides. And the city is the have and have nots have never been further. He has never been further from who he was at the beginning, but never closer either. It is what it is. It's I think the physicality of it works, especially since they got Tom Hardy in high heels fighting. The guy's like 5'4", but I think he's like 5'6", not a very tall guy. But yeah, I think that I was happy with it. I was emotionally connected to it. I went and saw it in the theaters. It was an important film for me to see. And this is when I was DJing, and I wasn't as focused on, storytelling. I had kind of departed, unfortunately, from that. Not that I was never not interested, but I wasn't. Today, I'm much more involved that I went back to it. I had my schooling before that, and I took my little dive. So this was in my limbo stage, and it still made me go to the movies to see it, and I went, and it wasn't a date or anything. I went to go see this film. Like, there was no alternative motive to go see it. So yeah, it works, and it's, again, he's not in a good situation where he has to end this series of films that really is a serialized story in its incarnation, meaning it's base. I'm trying to think. Its core, its actual genre, a comic book, serialized stories. Meaning story after story after story doesn't get an ending. They get endings and then they reboot and do this. So it's like, it's a hard thing to do. It's a big task.
You try to do the Lord of the Rings approach, really, in terms of the trilogy.
But that's one story that's told in 3 parts.
Yeah, but then it's not a continuation. It's one story. But I feel like that final film was more of what I mean by that Lord of the Rings comparison is how you had the Return of the King. That was like the real epic conclusion of the war. And I found The Dark Knight Rises as that. I think for me, though, the one scene that sticks out in my memory from this film is the pit scene where Bruce is climbing the pit. I think it's one of the best scenes in Nolan's filmography. And the reason I think that is because of Hans Zimmer's brilliant score. Yes. I think the music during that scene, Rise, I believe it is absolutely brilliant. The way it just keeps building. You have the men in the prison, in the pit, chanting the hymn that we hear throughout the film leading up to that point, and he finally has that moment to rise, to jump over, get out of the pit, throw the rope down, get all the others out, and go back to Gotham and become the Batman one last time to save the entire city. And I think that scene is really the emotional lead into his final moments as Batman, and it really does pay off, I think, the way it's directed and the way the music, in particular Hans Zimmer's brilliant score,
absolutely
gets that through.
That's an absolute compliment to say that it reminds you of the the Return of the King, and I've heard that comparison before, so that speaks volumes about it. And as well, you have a situation in which you have a empathy that is invoked for Bane because you are experiencing his story during that climb as well. So it's always advantageous to add layers to your antagonist and understand where he's coming from, because your true antagonist, and I can't remember, it's who played Mal, terrible with names today, but that's Bane is the soldier.
Marion Courtyard.
That's, you go. That's why I love you. But she's the mastermind. He's the soldier, and she's
the one who climbed the pit essentially. And Nolan does his typical Nolan in not letting you realize that until the end, and it's just.
But he's torn to pieces for letting her. Yeah.
And the connections to Batman Begins with Ra's al Ghul, with her being Talia al Ghul, is just, a brilliant way to come full circle, as we were saying before.
Yes, he ties it together, and he ties it together when it literally is like a whole bunch of yarn from different threads just put into a fucking wood chipper, and then you're supposed to piece that together. He's dealing with a lot. I think that the variables are there, so and they're not advantageous. So it was brave of him to do. He had nothing to gain, because The Dark Knight, is just he won Oscars.
Just phone it in, Chris. Just make a bad film for once.
Most people just wouldn't do it, probably. You know where to go, but down from here. So, and I just watched the next one, Interstellar, and I'm embarrassed to say, but I messaged you, and I just was enthralled by it. I thought it was so good, and it's the perfect mix of science and sentiment, and the idea of of love being something more than just this social benefit, meaning it's good for childcare and self-preservation. It explores all these ideas about human primal emotion that I think is so beautifully done. And I love how it's this apocalyptic situation with the Dust Bowl, with all of the the crops are being killed, and so forth. I don't know the science behind it, but it's just that the Earth is going to shit. But it's not like super thunderstorms or like a comet. It's like no, it's like this. They're at the baseball game, and then the first time I see that dust coming, and they all stand up, and I remember this vividly. I played Little League, when a storm would come, and you'd have to games up because lightning. The first time lightning strikes, everybody's got to call it in. You got to reschedule the game, and that's what they all do. Like they all stand up at the beginning, and they say, they're not making a huge deal out of it because life goes on. Like even in these bad, as we see, terrible situations. So I think that it's a very practical approach to a very complex and high concept film. And Matthew McConaughey would not be my go-to for that role, but I think he nailed it. Again, another. I'm saying that now
surprised
he would be,
me as well when I saw him.
But I would.
I didn't expect that.
You think I would have? No, I would have been voting against that. But and I would have been a fool too. So I think that it proves
he's done this on multiple occasions. With the actors.
Yep.
He did it with Harry Styles in Dunkirk. He did it. I mean, he didn't really have much dialogue, of course, but we'll come on to that. But Heath Ledger. All the casting choices he's done. No one expected to be, what they were. And I think Nolan really does have a trust for the people he works with. Most of the actors, I was reading this Tenet article the other day. Most of the actors he talks to for his leading roles, his protagonist, and, Matthew McConaughey said this. I think he's the famous example of saying it. You can watch an interview online. I believe it was the Hollywood Reporter that he did an interview for, and he was saying that essentially Chris he comes around your house. They don't send a studio man or ring you up. Chris comes around your house. Like they book in, for Chris to come around the actor's house, and he goes there and he talks to the actor for about, a good hour or two, and he doesn't tell them anything about the film. He just wants to get to know the person, have a cup of tea with them and just talk to them about, what does it mean to be a father? That's what he said to Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, he had lunch with him.
He was like, well done, you've got the role.
Yeah,
that's the kind of thing he does as a director, and it's and you see the film, and that Interstellar is very much about the connection, the emotional connection between a father and a daughter through space. And I think a lot of people like to say Nolan is a cold director. I was telling you this before.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to say he's a cold director, but when you watch a film like Interstellar, you cannot. I don't know how you can watch that and say that the guy doesn't have emotion. At the backbone of all of his films, there's an emotional relationship or concept going on.
Yeah, I don't, and I've heard that before. And then when you re-brought it up to me, especially after Interstellar, because I was in this perpetual state of just joy. I really was. But and I heard that again, and it's like he takes a cold scenario. God, I got messages.
Yes.
Exactly. Hold on, because messages are coming through. Hold on, I gotta tell this person this. Don't say okay after I say stop. Okay, do not do it again. I guarantee I'm gonna get another beat. But anyways, it's cold situations and scenarios in which he injects warmth into. That is the opposite of a cold filmmaker. He takes these scenarios which seem very cold and very heartless, and he injects heart. What more? Are you saving civilization, or are you saving your daughter? Is there any worth in loving somebody after they're dead? All these things, like these cold, like almost utilitarian, perspectives on things that you would think would have to be the approach to a scenario like that. He injects. I don't get it. It's not cheesy.
Because I did a dissertation on Interstellar in 2001.
Oh, okay.
And I was told before doing that, when I told my tutor about I wanted to take on this project, and she put me in touch with someone else who was into filmmakers and directors, and he told me that Nolan's a cold filmmaker, so it was going to be hard to tackle him. And I just couldn't understand that. I didn't know, because Interstellar is, for me, his most emotional film. It's one that really does heighten the emotion he tackles in his two characters, in Murph and Cooper. And, what I did in that essay was talk about how, and this is a way of showing, I think, the emotion in Interstellar. 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was the clear inspiration for Interstellar, is about how spiritual forces beyond our control can raise us forward in the universe.
Mm-hmm.
Interstellar was about humans pushing themselves forward.
Yes.
And the way you look at that is through lots of different things. But the way I personally look at it, I know it's a weird observation, but if you look at the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey, the clear idol of that film, and then you look at TARS in Interstellar, the monolith is a statue. It's like a statue, really, isn't it? The way it sits up in its position and it
Yes.
floats through the air. It's very spiritual, and the apes look up at it and they're like, "What is this?" Basically, and we all look at it, as audience goers, "What is that?" It's because it's a spiritual force. It's something that we don't quite understand. In Interstellar, you've got TARS, a robot that can walk, acts like a human. They can control his emotion. It's puppeteered by a human as well, practically, of course, as Nolan likes to do. And all of these things, that's what gets across the emotion in that film for me. Not just that example. There's plenty of examples in the film. Like the bookcase sequence is probably the most obvious when, Cooper is absolutely giving it all emotionally in that scene to try and communicate to Murph through the bookcase. But yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. No. I just wanted to get your perspective. It's overtly emotional is what I'm saying. Like, I think it's his most overtly emotional because they talk about these things overtly. We're talking about the undertones of these other films and, about the strings on the puppet and people figuring out what you're really, those are all underneath. Those are all meta. That's subtext. This is very much so. I don't get how it's the coldest. He's slamming him. If anything, I don't feel this way, but I could maybe agree with more. It was too overt. Like I'm saying I would agree with that more. I'm not saying that's how I feel, but like the emotion is just that's what's for dinner. Is like because it's all these scenarios with Anne Hathaway's character having a love connection to one of the other that are on when they're picking which one to go to, which planet to go to.
Edmund's planet.
Yes, Edmund. So there's an emotional tie there. You have within the first hour of the film, Matthew McConaughey experienced 21 years of his children's lives in video.
How could I not mention that scene while talking about emotion? I mean, that was impactful.
Yeah, because it's what seems like an hour to him or 3 hours to him, it's been 21 years and now he's got to sit back and watch his kids' lives pass by. When he's I'd
argue that's one of the best cuts in editing that Nolan's done.
Yes. And he has an editor and he has an editor that I'm blanking on his name, but
how do I not know this?
It's a good.
I should know this.
It's a consistent work flow that they work
with.
Yeah. He seems to obviously, and what you're talking about. That's I heard that story about McConaughey as well. Like he walked away and he's like, "What was that?" Like he didn't know.
Lee Smith.
Yes. I'm pretty sure he has to be the editor for this as well. But you really have to give props to the editor for Nolan's films because editing really it's not it's not a sexy thing to talk about. But it is. I'd argue that it's up in the top 3 for important roles of a film. I mean, if you have bad editing, you have a bad film. There's no way around it. You know what I mean? It's just especially with dealing with the way in which Nolan tells stories. These cuts and all that. They have to be so precise.
Another comparison, if you're talking about editing, going back to 2001 and Kubrick. Kubrick is Nolan's idol as a director. He's always mentioned Kubrick a lot. And if you look at Kubrick, the way he edits a film, it's very slow. Everything's lengthened. I think the average length of a cut in his film is about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
The cut it doesn't cut. The shot does not cut. It's constantly on screen and, things are moving within the frame. In a Nolan film, everything's quick. He does the opposite. And I think what we were saying earlier, I think we said it before the stream. I'm not too sure now because we've gone through everything so far in regards to his filmography.
These are going to be deep dives, guys. This is how they do story.
Yeah, but Nolan, in terms of his quick cut editing, is something that the way he films it. He with Kubrick, he would take a week to film a shot in Eyes Wide Cut. Nolan, 2 or 3 takes, move on. That's what he does, He likes to get the natural reactions, and he did that with the spacecraft, specifically in Interstellar, the Endurance. He wouldn't use green screen on the windows. He'd have real projectors to get the reactions of the actors on board. And it's just these little tricks he does in his filmmaking. I guess you could say in Inception, where he uses 0G in some scenes, and then he builds the corridor on like a big set piece, doesn't he? And he spins it round. All these different tricks he uses to get actors to perform what he wants. He thinks them through so well beforehand that he can just get the shot within a few takes.
Yeah, like we mentioned that he doesn't use zoom lenses. He if the camera's close, it's close. The inserts, which you see in all of his film, Memento, they're the mementos. The totem is in Inception. In Dunkirk, you have it when you are it's when they show, it's always something that they're looking at, whether it's a picture, whether it's but it is the you are surrounded pamphlets that are falling. You get that it's like almost a Dutch angle, but it's not really, and it's coming from about the hip, and it's within the hands, so like you're looking at, like, from their eyes, that's what they're seeing. And that's what, instead of like showing a map and being like in Dunkirk at the evacuation of France, the Nazis have rushed through with a blitzkrieg like never seen before, you know what I mean, like most things would have. They'd show a news story or show a politician talking about the German, pretty much a bunch of meth head Germans plowing through until they get to the beach, but like they show what the situation is very simply but pragmatically, and like you said, quick. I know Anne Hathaway like got her suit flooded during that scene, and she was saying something, and she said something about how cold it was, and she's getting numb. He goes, "Let's shoot it." And he got it going, but she really credits that because it wasn't cruel. This isn't like, I'm not gonna Tarantino.
She said she was fine. That's what
yes.
said in the interview. So
he made sure she was fine. People,
it's fine. Exactly.
But he gets it done, and he deals with that raw.
No
emotion.
Safety issues. Don't foul Nolan.
Yeah. When we get to Tarantino.
And just to stress, Kubrick is fantastic for his filmmaking. I wasn't like degrading him, when I was saying about how his shots are longer.
But they're different. It's not better.
It's different
or
styles.
Worse.
Exactly. Yeah. It's not better or worse. It's just different. And that quick cut editing that he presents, what I was saying was the way he films it in very few takes, and he gets things prepared. It works for his style of filmmaking, and that's what we're trying to convey, really.
Absolutely. And I think that speaks to what we're about to get to at Dunkirk, when he really changes it up, but at the same time keeps it his essential crew to be the same, because a lot of the reason that he says he works with a lot of same actors is the most important thing in any job is dependability, reliability, being dependable, knowing that you can get along with somebody. Yes, knowing how they feel about certain aspects of life and their psyche, and if they're going to get the emotion, that's important to get out of them as well, like you were speaking to. Very important. Also, though, do you like the person? Because you're going to be with them all the time, you know what I mean? Like, you don't see him change up casts that often, because he knows they're good at their craft. He knows that they get emotionally what he's doing, psychologically, philosophically, but they also are dependable people that he can work with. His director of photography is a constant by his side, and he doesn't really change up his crew really that much, and I think that it's newsworthy when he does, and that's just practical right there. That's not even just for filmmaking. That's if you're gonna run an Arby's, try to get it with the best people, and don't change your register person if they're good. So with Dunkirk, we're dealing with a historical event for the most part. I know that I'm getting older, but a lot of people are aware of. So he's dealing with a situation in which he cannot manipulate so much the situation within a non-linear storytelling, but he still chooses to use three different perspectives throughout this film. Also, a big thing that he does is really show his acting chops by having the intensity of this movie and the stakes really on the line without having much dialogue whatsoever. And he does this utilizing this non-linear storytelling by having what I believe is 2 weeks. Is it 2 weeks on the beach?
It's 1 week, 1 hour, 1 week. Well, no, 1 hour, 1 day, 1 week.
Yes,
I believe. Yes.
So you got one day on the boat, 1 week on the beach, 1 hour in the plane.
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry.
He really does strip in Dunkirk. He really does strip himself down, I think, as a filmmaker. Not to that was kind of a weird analogy, but
he stripped himself down. He's like, no, I did.
But yeah, he really did, break apart his filmmaking, I think, in Dunkirk. Normally he was used to doing longer films, 2.5 hour, 2 hour 50. It was obviously Interstellar. That was nearly 3 hours long. He went back to a 1 hour and 40-minute film, hardly any dialogue. It's a war film with no generals in boardrooms talking. It really just stays with soldiers on a beach trying to survive. The music is very unorthodox. Is that the right word to use? It's he uses a shepherd tone,
Yeah,
I
I was
believe, Hans
hoping you'd
Zimmer.
bring that up. Yeah, exactly. You'll
Yeah,
be better than me than to explain it.
and for those who don't know, shepherd tone is like when you go, if a piece of music rises, it constantly sounds like it's consistently rising.
Hmm.
So there's no end point. It's just continuously going, and it's the two note approach, I believe, Hans Zimmer uses, and that works. Because I went and saw Interstellar live at Royal Albert Hall, and
Hmm.
Nolan was there. He came in the red carpet. We had Jessica Chastain. Hans Zimmer was there, but Hans Zimmer in particular played that score, and it sounds absolutely phenomenal on the organ in the Royal Albert Hall.
Yes.
And you really get a sense of the shepherd tone in there. You can hear the rising notes, and then it just never stops. It continuously escalates in some of the scenes. The one I'm thinking about in particular is the docking scene.
Yes.
That was People stood up and clapped for that because that was brilliant. What he performed, at the Royal Albert Hall there. But yeah, Interstellar is a film. I'm talking of Interstellar, aren't I?
Well, you were talking about Interstellar there, but I get
God,
it's a set, but it's the corkscrew and the barbershop twist. The shepherd's tone is applicable to both. Yeah, that's why I didn't. It's the same thing. No, yeah.
Yeah.
When
He definitely used that approach. I think in Interstellar, and it kind of built up into Dunkirk, and it became the prominent idea for the score.
it builds anticipation, and that's why Interstellar and
Yes.
Dunkirk. That's why I didn't stop you, because it's very relevant for everything we're seeing in Dunkirk as well. This is a movie that is building anticipation without dialogue. Hell, there's a French soldier with him for the whole movie, and they don't know he's French because it's realistic. What the hell would you be saying during that?
Yeah.
You know what I
exactly.
mean? It's so. I mean, the most dialogue you get is in the cockpit and then on the boat with Cillian Murphy and wonderful stage actor.
Michael Caine has as much dialogue as anyone in that film.
Yeah, and it's the build, and I think what you said stripped. I think that what he did was really test his test himself with it. But I think that it wasn't just like a vanity thing. I think it really works because, again, how much are you going to be saying? And then it's the laws of diminished returns, right? When you overdo things, and that can go for anything. And I think he kind of proves it because when you hear Tom Hardy swoop back in when they say he's on me, and you hear I'm on him.
Yeah,
beautiful.
Simple. The action is the story.
Mm-hmm.
I see Dunkirk. I mean, I can kind of see Tenet maybe being like this too, but Dunkirk is like his Mad Max in a way. The action drives the story.
Yes.
And, it drives the emotion of the character. Well, I mean, the characters drive the emotion, but you don't know the characters' backstories in the film. You don't know nothing about them. You know that you could project your fear onto the characters that you're watching. You have to, because, the threat of the German. And that's another thing. You don't even see the Germans. You see them blurred out in the final shot of the film.
Yeah.
With Tom Hardy. So he very much stripped back everything in that film. He took the bare bone basics of filmmaking, but heightened them up into this war thriller about survival for an hour and 40 minutes. And you can see why people say it's his Oscar film. It's his Oscar bait film. But I think he really just tried to tell, this story that Americans and the rest of the world who aren't in, Europe, they've heard of, but they don't quite know the story. And for him to take a film like that not much people know the complete story of our generation and, the last few generations, to take a story that not much people have heard of and then make it a box office success. It was the highest grossing World War II film worldwide. It beat Saving Private Ryan. And to do that with an event that not much people had heard of, and also the type of filmmaking like we've been discussing in approach he took, it's quite a staggering achievement, really, to make nearly $500 million with a film like that.
He's taking a situation, because usually in a story, I was just talking about this in my Patreon only stream about how, okay, procedural dramas, like and NCIS or whatever. Okay, it's always rinse and repeat with a crime. And I was just speaking to how you think that you could have a drama in which there is a different crime every single episode, which there is in these procedurals, but you could change detectives as well, that they wouldn't be necessary to keep as a static character, because you should care enough about a little girl getting killed and say like a suspect that needs to be apprehended, right? Nope, because you need to care about the detectives in their lives. Like Jenny is trying to go back to school, or Dave the detective has a divorce that's happening, and it's the emotion to your protagonist that gets you to care about a situation, even in a life or world ending situation. I brought up Armageddon, which is a Michael Bay, in which, but I'm talking, what we're talking about here is a full, almost blown situation driven story, which does not usually work. But the reason it works is because enough to know is that they're human beings, and he builds it. But again, that's usually, it sounds, the optics for storytelling through a visual medium are not, you cannot think that psychologically you will react the same way as if you were to really see it. So again, because like in these, like, police dramas, you should care enough about the victims that you wouldn't need the static like precinct to go back to. No, you do need, they got to do all the bullshit with their wife or their husband, you know what I mean? Not that it's bullshit, but you have to care about the people solving the crime, else you don't care about the crime in there. He gets you to care about these people. And it sounds, and it's not, oh, you don't want people to die. Of course you don't want people to die. But you go and try that in any other film, it doesn't work. The optics are not the same for your emotional, the emotional gravity of it is not there. It is not a psychoanalyst of a human being. It is just a different scenario. It is something that divides us. So you usually have to be connected to that emotional spine somehow. And he does it by giving us this state of anticipation and worry and dread and stakes that are done through that 3 time point, linear storytelling, non-linear storytelling, because, we see that the plane's getting taken out, that's going at the boat, that's saving the people. We see the people on the shore clap, so you see like the end, but everything is happening out of sync, and we're getting these very, very, every single scene means something. It isn't just to say, look, Johnny blew up this guy. No. It's like these people are at the brink of death with every breath, and we don't even see a German. I don't even know how he does it, but I feel like they're about to die at every single moment. Every single moment you think they're about to die.
The bullet hole scene was especially one in the boat with Styles. And another thing to mention with the emotion of that film as well, as I was going back to the whole cold filmmaker thing, how he does Dunkirk, I think is, throughout the film that they're trying to survive to get back home, essentially, to the people that care about them, that we don't meet really much in the film, apart from this one boat with Mark Rylance and obviously his son. Yeah, and obviously they come across Cillian Murphy, who was in a different timeline at a different point because of the whole 1 week, 1 day thing. But the moment all them ships come over, you're waiting for someone to just reach out and save these men who are just constantly, on the bridge of death, like you're saying. The minute them boats come over, the minute Commander Bolton looks through his binoculars out at the sea, and he says, his commander says to him, "Who's that?" And he says, "Home." And then the music swells. It's the first moment really that the music, I'd say, changes pace. It picks up even further, but in an emotional way. It's just Nolan building up to that point, I think.
You can breathe. You can breathe.
Yeah, you can finally breathe.
First time. Yeah. And it's hard to understand how Dunkirk was looked at as a success when it was a full out retreat. But they're showing, they got to, this could have changed. Now in retrospect, hopefully people, I guess I shouldn't have said that most people do, because I'm like huge, and I'm one of those people that just watch a shit ton of history documentaries. I'm really into history, so I knew about it. But I don't think that's fair to say, especially over on this side. Like now, even the Americans understand how close Hitler was, and maybe they didn't see it within a blink of an eye. And all those French and they make sure to take care to move on to Tenet to close it up. But those French soldiers that stayed there and did the for the tactical retreat, and stayed on the back end, and all got just butchered. It's like, and because you see that almost the disdain that they look at the British soldier, because they're sitting there behind the bags, sandbags at the machine gun. The French soldiers that are waiting, that Harry Styles moves by earlier in the film. It's not that, but they almost just look sad and a little mad at the same time. Like they're not saying anything.
Talking to the French soldier, we do see in the film, played by, or we follow with them, Honorine Bernard, I think his name is, the actor. It was criticised, Dunkirk, as a film for not portraying the French right. And then you look at that one example that Nolan used of that soldier. He did probably one of the most heroic acts in the film.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember, but when the boat was hit by the torpedo
Yeah.
and it was sinking and he opened the door for them,
Yeah.
he could have just got out himself, but,
He
jumped
went
off the boat,
back.
but he didn't. He didn't know these people. Yeah, he went back, he opened the door, and then he ended up dying. And it's like, he was the hero, really. He was one of the main heroes I found. They all are heroes just through survival, but he was one that stuck out in my mind. And I couldn't believe that piece that people were bringing up about the French weren't, portrayed right. Because I thought his character, he didn't speak. He said like one word in the whole film, but just that little act of heroism. It's about communities coming together. People across the sea helping the soldiers, the different types of soldiers there coming together, all to just purely survive.
And and they make sure to frame that in within the timing of the scene to because he looks back and keeps moving. He has time to leave. They make that is very obvious. And also, I guess maybe it's just his people that don't know the historical context of it. They might not know that those soldiers that are at the machine gun nests are all French. They're not British soldiers. So like the French are, they're defending this is a back action.
Exactly.
So it's like, but I guess, it's not, it is what it is.
The
French were, a lot of French got out there too, but they were not prioritized by any means. So they were, the ones that were there, as we saw, had to hide and try to sneak in. And there was other ones that they knew, you know what I mean? Like, that's that rear assault or whatever you call it. So it's just like, I don't know, that was impactful to me because you would have to, they're not like, as a human, you just would know if you're doing what they were doing, there would be a little bit of hate or anger, at least, or frustration.
Yeah,
like,
and he still finds a way to convey that.
Yeah.
I think in certain very small moments in the film, like when Fionn Whitehead, the main actor, is running with the stretcher with the French guy, and they run through, and then the British kind of general there tells him he's holding up all the French soldiers. He's like, he tells him you can't go through, and then he shows him obviously we got a stretcher. They let him through. It's just moments like that, little key moments that Nolan conveys that, I think.
And just that sense of reality of it's not like
real history. Yeah,
it's like it's not inhumane. It's not like shitting on French. It's literally, if you're going to be mauled to death by a bunch of bullets in a day or so, and you're still fighting and they're all on the beach, you're gonna be a little bit angry, but you're still, but they're still doing it. They're doing this thing, so it's like you can't judge. So I guess maybe the context there, but yeah, beautiful. I mean, it's just on paper, so many things of what Nolan does just. I don't know how I want to be in that first meeting with Warner Brothers. You know what I mean? Because like now they've got his trust.
It's a filmmaker studio. Yeah.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it's especially with today with all, there's some studios out there. I mean, I have nothing wrong. Some of the films that say Disney make and stuff, I think they make some good films here and there, but there's just a lot of times where I find myself thinking, do they care as much about the directors behind the like their actual visions for the projects?
Yeah, are they trying
the interference?
Yeah, is it just a capitalistic approach or not? But in speaking about that, right on point here and you're going to take the lead on Tenet, because this is a film that is supposed to save theaters. This is a film. I mean, that's a little grandiose. It's a little bit of hyperbolic speech, but it really is being.
He's the only one with balls at the minute to say, okay, here we go. You can have my film in theaters.
But also, like, over in the long stretch here, you got Tarantino that that speaks similar. He's saying we don't. He does aim as Nolan does. I'd say Nolan even more so, like, because it is hard. Convince me to go to a theater. Tenet is the thing I want to see at IMAX. It's hard to get me to go to a theater, and I love film. So it's like, how do you save it? So tell me how they're gonna save it here, and let me put the cast up on the. I'm very intrigued by this film, and we've got some newcomers, which I think is a smart move that he's got.
A lot of newcomers, not in just the casting roles, but in the production roles. We've got Ludwig Göransson in the score role for the film. Hans Zimmer's obviously doing Dune. That was a childhood project that he'll be back with Chris at some point, but it's just for this project that he's diverted to Dune, of course.
God, I really don't like that. I really wish that I like it for Dune.
I agree with you, but after I watched the prologue in IMAX earlier on. It was last year, in December time, I think it was. I watched the prologue in IMAX, and obviously listening to the score in that first teaser and the teaser they debuted in July in cinemas in IMAX. The score sounds brilliant. What he's doing with it so far, I don't think we've heard enough to really get an idea of if it's going to be on the level of some of Zimmer's great scores. But so far, I'm liking what I hear from the score, considering he's taking a new approach with new people, because we've obviously got a new editor, Lee Smith, I believe, isn't
And
doing
Jennifer
editing.
Lame, I have up on
Jennifer
screen.
Lame.
Yeah.
What did she do?
I am
I
looking as we
forgot the-
speak. I'm getting
I
it.
forgot the project she did, but it was very intriguing. That
I'm pulling it up. Let's see. So she's got Hereditary, Manchester by the Bay.
Hereditary, yeah, that's it.
Anything else of note? A few different. Not seen.
Yeah, he's mainly changed up a few of the production roles, but in terms of saving theaters, I think we have to look in the short term. I mean, I read this Total Film article. I did a video on my channel. Nolan was speaking about the release date, and he said that I think they really have been misrepresenting what he's been saying. They've been saying that this man is relentlessly trying to push this into theaters, and it has to be out in July 17th. He said in that article during the interview that we have the film ready. If theaters are open, we'll put our film up first to be played. Yeah. That's his mindset going into this, and the studio's mindset in particular. If theaters are operational, if things are starting to look better, we're looking at the short term, things are getting a bit better now. If they continue to improve into July, or if we have another peak, I guess, then they may have to delay it. But if things really continue to improve, by the time we get to July the 17th, Tenet should be fine to come out. It all depends on the short term. We don't really know, but we're only a month and a half out. So hopefully in the next month, things will really start to clear up and we can look forward to going to the theaters. But I think Nolan in particular has actually had a pair of balls in this situation to go, I'll put my movie on the line, the box office of my movie. You can put it in theaters because I care about the theatrical experience.
Yes.
There's a lot of directors who are just, who were around that date or a few months before, a few months after, just jumping an entire year and going, nope, we want to save our box office. But Nolan's like, no, put it in theaters. Let's try and get the ball rolling.
That's what I'm getting at, is in more of a macro sense, as we're doing. Like, I feel that I know that he's taking a stand. With COVID, there's a different situation right now, but overall, he is a auteur, as we've spoken about the age of the auteurs. This came, when you have, in the 70s when people started to talk about Hitchcock and Kubrick and stuff like that. It's when the movie stars started to be overshadowed by the filmmaker, and there's only a few of those around, and Nolan is one of them. And he is one that makes films I feel like should be seen in theaters. I have no problem with other filmmakers that make things that are digital releases that are going to be fine. Yeah, exactly. But this scope of a film seems like there's more than just like a dying on that hill for him. It seems like a film with what we're dealing with visually that we should see in theaters.
The type of films he makes
in general,
he wants to be represented that way. He doesn't want to go, okay, well, I've spent $200 million, loads of IMAX footage, loads of practical effects to be seen on a huge IMAX screen, to then just go, oh, let's put it on digital
and watch it on my iPhone. Good, pretty good, I guess. Yeah. Yeah. So
yeah, he's not gonna do that. He's a director who's always stuck with cinema. He's had some really bad confrontations on that point. If you want to see one, I'd definitely recommend watching a BBC Newsnight interview with a BBC presenter who I don't necessarily think he was attacking Nolan, but he was very diggy with his questions in terms of Nolan and pure film. Mm-hmm. And I think it's just what he enjoys doing. He wants to save something that, he's grew up watching and loving, that type of filmmaking. And he just believes it's the most natural way to tell his stories, the most real way. It takes a lot of effort to do what, he does with film. I mean, you just have to look at his process of remastering 2001 at the Cannes Film Festival and what he did just to get that up and running again. And it just shows his love for the craft. And I think you're seeing that again with the Tenet release date, how he's like, if the film has to be delayed, we will delay it, but it's ready if theaters are open. And I want my film to be out for when theaters open, so that we can start to re-interest audiences in cinemas, coming back to the cinemas.
Because you're gonna have, because again, it'd be different if it was just a passion. And I feel that Tarantino, there's less of a case for why I need to see his films in theater. I'm not saying you don't. I'm saying they're one of the better ones. But like Nolan, I'm with. But the market's going to keep trending the other way. It seems you need other filmmakers to join
Oh
in on
yeah,
this,
you
or else
need
it's just
multiple. Yeah,
it's
it's
going
a
to become
good point.
unrealistic. You know what I mean? You're going to have Disney opening their own theaters, from what I hear soon, which they'll film Disney, they'll show Disney movies there. So it's like, it's becoming very, very difficult with the market. It's like
Health goes first. I just want to stress that health.
Yeah,
always the first thing. It's
COVID
always
aside,
the most important.
This is a different situation, but this is not a battle that he just started fighting with COVID. COVID has interfered more so with Tenet, but or potentially could. But overall, he makes films for theaters, and that is still an uphill battle even without COVID these days. And what do you think visually we're going to get in this film that is going to play off of Inception? Meaning, like, is he going to step it up another notch? Do you think that? I think this is going to be a fantastic film. It looks very Bond-like. It looks very, Nolan-esque, of course. With now we're not even dealing with non-linear storytelling, which will probably start at the end credits. I saw a funny comment. Somebody said that. It says Nolan probably started at the end credits. But we're dealing with all these shots of bullets going back into guns. So it's the metaphysical that we're dealing with as well. So we'll roll it up here, but I want a quick take, because I know you've had some wonderful videos on it about what to expect visually, like thematically from this film, and if you think it's going to be able, because now he keeps setting that bar higher and higher, right? It's like, is he going to be able to keep up with the expectations? I think he is, but Inception is what this will be held against.
With Nolan, I think we're used to seeing a level of quality every film he does, even if we like one less than the other. So for me personally, look, we don't know, but we have to watch the film first. It could turn out to be not great, but we haven't seen it yet. But if we're to go on past films, then it looks like it's going to be a level of quality, a huge quality there. But I see Tenet, going back to that interview that I read, because there was so much information in there. I was surprised that he was saying some of the stuff he was. He was saying that the plane scene that we see in the movie, and this is a very important point, the plane crash that we see in the trailer is towards the first act of the film.
Oh, okay.
And something like that, he said, would be, I believe it was Emma Thomas who said this, would be at the end of one of his films. So that could be playing into the timeline a little bit of what we're doing in Tenet. But overall, it just shows you the scale of how the film's going to go up, from the start. And the stuff we're seeing in the trailer is only just tipping the iceberg of what he's doing in this film, especially for an original film on $200 million. If I'm right, it's the second highest budgeted original film of all time, behind Avatar, if I'm right. So that's crazy in itself. But I think Tenet is going to be a culmination of everything we love about Nolan. Inception was that film that he worked up to for 10 years, from 2000 to 2010. Between 2010 and now up to 2020, I think we're getting that. But I think we're getting not just 10 years of Nolan, I think we're getting 20 years of Nolan. And this is what, Emma Thomas also said in that article, that she wants... Chris, her partner, has been talking about this movie and putting ideas on paper for 20 years. And he was doing that with Inception for, a decade. So this is the movie he's been building up to even longer than Inception. So I think we're getting, like you said, I think we're getting some... the mind-bending nature of time, but there's always something there that we don't know. He likes to present something original. Surprising fact about the making of book for this film, it's titled A Quantum Cold War. So it looks like we're going into some, time-twisting Cold War territory, which is very interesting, I think. Overall, though, based on the footage we have seen, it's hard to decode a Nolan film, before it comes out, because he likes to only put a little bit of footage in the trailer. He likes to keep the main stuff for the film. He doesn't like to ruin it.
It's hard to decode once you see it.
The
first time. Yeah.
It's almost impossible in most, Nolan films to do that. But what we have seen so far from the action, the way, you've got the reversing, the imagery of reversing bullets coming out the windows fixing themselves, car flip and then flip back into position, boat traveling backwards on the water. All of this symmetry just looks like typical Nolan. It's just, he's innovating again in the imagery he presents. I don't think I've seen someone do it like that. And the thing is, these reverse scenes, they aren't just reversing.
Yeah.
These are scenes that are going forward in the time that the people within them scenes, the objects are going forward, but they're manipulating objects to go the other way
Yeah.
through time.
In
So
using practical effects. So Jesus, I don't even know what that.
So
yeah.
what are they using? Like Inception, you had the briefcases. Are they using some sort of technological device to trigger these moments?
I think so. From the little bit I've seen, and I'm not anywhere near as informed as you are, but the one thing that because at first my first thought was, well, first off, there is 10 feature films, as we've stated before. Tell me one is bad, and I'll tell you you're wrong. I mean, it's your opinion. You know what I mean? So like, but I was not as enthralled at first. I was like, I didn't catch that wasn't just. I'm like, okay. I'm like, they've been doing that technology since Memento and before it. But then I caught that what you just said, that it was isolated reversals. And, so that's going to take some sort of cloning in the scenes, meaning practically, and then in the edit. But story-wise, what I saw is him looking at those with Patterson, Davis.
The bullet.
Yeah, Jordan, what is his name?
John David Washington.
John David Washington.
Yeah,
Denzel's son. Yeah,
that's the one.
Don't tell anybody. He's walking with Patterson, and he's saying he's like bullets. He goes, so that means it hasn't happened. So like he's figuring it out in reverse as well. You get what I mean? Like it's not just like so that's very intriguing to me because it's like he has to solve a crime in reverse. And I think it's
going to be twisty.
Yeah,
but I think Nolan's going to find a way to get us comfortable with how it all works, but then he's going to throw a spanner in the works like he normally does. With Inception, you had the multiple levels of the dream, which did create confusion at first, and then obviously the limbo. In Memento, you had the black and white and color, which eventually comes together and you start to work things out. In this, I'm guessing there's going to be some sort of manipulation of time. Obviously, a good thing to notice, the Dunkirk logo was split, as you said, into 3 time structures. The logo of Dunkirk had sand, sea, and air in its logo. The Tenet logo, I think they have changed it because of copyright, but originally it was twisted so that the T was upside down, the E was upside down, but if you spin the logo, it's like the same way.
What does Tenet mean?
Thing. It's a principle of belief, I believe. I'm going to have a look again because it is a very...
I don't know why I'm just thinking of it now, but yeah, it's like what is Tenet?
It's a principle of belief, I believe. A principle of belief, especially one of the main principles of a religion or philosophy.
Oh, so they're him again looking subjectively at an objective world, in dealing with that, and I think it's gonna be, I think it's definitely, I want to see it for the spectacle, but the thing that always sells me is because of the deep emotional spine that his films have, which again, not a cold storyteller. I think that to wrap it up here, we're going to be covering every single week, and I'm going to have John on multiple times. I believe that we're going to have who did we decide on for your, not Kubrick,
Denis Villeneuve.
There we go. Yeah, he's doing Dune. Yeah.
Dune, yeah.
Yep. We're going to be talking about these. They're a little bit long, but if we're going to talk about these, these filmmakers and these storytellers, big picture, what they've done, it's going to take some investigating, and, I'm thrilled to have on somebody that's as learned as you and as well spoken as you, and just a wealth of information. So like when you look at Chris Nolan as a filmmaker, I think if he were to quit today, he would still be known as one of the early, 21st century filmmakers that were the most impactful. He'd be looked at as a Kubrick already, and he's not going, knock on wood, not going anywhere anytime soon. You got 10 feature films, every single one of them's damn good. Yes, some aren't as good.
Even if some are like weaker, they've all got a level of quality to them that you can watch again. Yeah, I think
none of them are dumpster fires by any means, and they all have something about them that's not just good. It's very enticing. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know how better to put it. It's just something that really drives, like when I was messaging you about the emotional spine of, Interstellar, talking about how the love and sentiment, the science and sentiment, that really drives you. Some of it, I could see why some people didn't like. And I think that the practical in some instances, especially when at the very end, flying through time and space and all that, like, it was what it was. But again, like, you have to really, really look for issues within these films, and I think that Nolan is going to influence a whole new generation of filmmakers, and we're going to.
I mean, he influenced me. I mean, I was The first film that I saw in IMAX, obviously it was the first film in IMAX, if I'm right, in cinemas, was The Dark Knight. And I saw
It
that
might have been
film
300. Was it
with
300?
my dad.
Go ahead. Sorry.
What were you saying?
I thought
300?
I thought Snyder's 300 might have been one of the first. Go ahead. I don't know it yet.
I think it was Dark Knight was the first main theatrical that was in IMAX. Obviously, IMAX have been going for years and they've been doing other stuff like the space stuff and everything. So, but yeah, it was the first theatrical film, and I saw that in cinemas with my dad for the first time back in 2008, and it just showed me. It was the film that showed me who the director can really speak through as a character in his filmmaking. What I saw in this film, all the other films I saw before that were blockbusters. I didn't really know filmmaking as a pure form. I just saw, characters. I saw big characters, blockbusters, franchises. And I saw that, and that was the first film that said to me that I want to get into filmmaking, because what he had done with that film, and then he continued, I think, even more so in Inception, was take big event filmmaking, big blockbuster films, and he'd put a level of independent filmmaking and fuse the two together. What he's done is he's approached all types of audiences.
Yep.
And he's combined it. He's tried to make a film for the majority of people and what they would want to see, even though he's put his character and what he likes about filmmaking into it, of course. But yeah.
I can't agree with that enough, because Batman Begins is a clear example, and maybe, who knows, I'm not him, I don't know him, but who knows if that was maybe a blessing in disguise. I don't know how amped he was about, I know he's probably a little bit apprehensive about taking on that type of a project. Anybody in the right mind would be, but his ability to put high concept, but ground it. Maybe that was his first initial test, and that really, no matter what, he's managed to do it time and time again. But to put that spectacle along with that grounded, emotional,
using them both.
Yeah.
I don't know what inspired him to do that, but
pushed into it. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, because you talk about Kubrick. That was the director he was inspired by, and he's a very artsy filmmaker. Everything was slow burn, everything's slow paced. Shots are slow, cinematography. The more you watch it, the better it gets, similar to Nolan. But with Nolan, there's a blockbuster essence to it. The filmmaking's quick. He's able to put his hands in both bags. And It's just something that I've always been into that ever since I saw, I think Inception was really the film that solidified my love for the director. Dark Knight got me into filmmaking. Inception solidified it. And yeah, I see them two films as I switch them at the top spot. Like some days it's Inception, some days it's The Dark Knight. I cannot decide which one, I love more. But it's his essence on taking a really well-developed story and characters and fusing that with this mixed approach to filmmaking, which everyone can watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And his numbers show it. His domestic numbers
consistent.
Are huge, and that is not the case these days. It's remake another Disney film and sell it to China. That is, there's nothing wrong with the global box office, but it obviously the capitalistic approach to filmmaking, and you do need to make money. It trends more of let's see what worked over here and reuse. But when you're looking at his films, they vary amongst theme but the same thematic options, the same thematic issue. I'm sorry, because you have theme and then you have thematic issue. Coming to age isn't a theme. Coming of age is just what happens. Thematic issue is of battling racism in the downs, in the deep South during the time of the social movement and so forth. Somebody that grows up with racism in their family and then moves to the north. Blah blah blah. There's all these things that they strand across all of his films, but they're not the same theme necessarily. If the tone of the movie, the structure of the film, differs vastly. Look at Dunkirk, Batman, The Prestige, Inception.
He's a genre filmmaker.
Yeah, they're not the same. You know what I mean? But they are the same. Is what I'm trying to poorly conveying how he is able to do this across a wide scope. You watch a film by Nolan, you don't want to be a movie star. You want to make movie stars.
Yeah.
And that's what you were just saying. It made you want to be a filmmaker.
Dunkirk's pure example of that as well. You know?
Not recognize, like, you wouldn't put that if you had to just, mix up these cards and think, okay, which films were done by Nolan? You hadn't seen Dunkirk or what? You probably wouldn't put that in. You wouldn't shuffle that into the deck. You'd be like, oh, he probably didn't do that one. That's probably done by Spielberg or something. And you can say Kubrick and you say Spielberg a lot, and but it's hard to really characterize those directors. You can, but I'm saying Nolan is far easier to characterize, and that's good. Meaning saying what especially specifically.
Actually, I agree with that. Actually, I think that's a good point to raise, because whenever I watch a Nolan film or think about one, you can list out the kind of the styles he does. He does in his films, and through story, and also through filmmaking. Spielberg, you can do the same in some essence, and I did with Kubrick, obviously, but he Nolan very much is highlighted. I think he stands out. He stands out today, and it's just
we should be able to. We are. You went to school for. You know what I mean? Like, we should be able to do Spielberg. You know what I mean? But it is for the average person that is just a normal person that just goes to the movies. I think they can say what Nolan does. It might, hopefully they enjoy this and stuff like this. But your average film goer, you say, what is Spielberg? Oh, it must be a big budget good movie. It's like, well, what is a good movie? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So yeah.
I mean, not much directors apart from Christopher Nolan can get 21 million views on a Tenet first trailer, and you just look at their numbers and you're like, wow, like he can do that with original films.
And he can leave you confused and happy at the same time. So usually to piss people, as we see with the Prestige and what we've talked about throughout here, is that if he's just keeping the people from clawing him apart, though. If they, he knows how to do it right. So that's a very thin line to walk, and he seems to know how to walk it, because that could go very wrong. As he is, obviously he fears it. I mean, it's a big part of his films, so especially the Prestige. So yeah, next week we're going to be doing Dan Harmon with Roger Roper from Shed on TV, and we're going to have the whole list out. I've got a lineup for all of June. I don't want to misspeak, so I had to remember who's on my 4th week, but we're going to keep this going, and John's going to come back for the first week of July, and we're going to break down some more, and we'll keep getting better at it. And if you want to watch live with us, you can always support me on Patreon, support Creativity, $3 a month. If it doesn't make a big difference to you fiscally, it makes a huge difference for me. I work full-time. I don't make money off of content. I just want to not lose money off of content, and I want to be able to invest in my channel to have higher production value, to have not just bigger but better content. So more content as well, being able to put out videos at a more steady basis. So I can't thank you enough, John, for coming on and having this 3-hour-long conversation. I mean, Nolan,
I have a blast every time I come on, and I think we've started off on a good path. I think we started off with Westworld and Jonathan Nolan, and Lisa Joy, of course. She's got her own movie coming out, so look out for that. Reminiscence, I think it's called. I found out about that yesterday. For some reason.
There's so much to talk about. Like, we'll have to maybe even do a note, like the Nolan fam, because of the Emma Thompson and Emma Thomas and Lisa Joy. Both of them are married to fellow filmmakers. Like, so there's this pattern, you know what I mean? This familiar relationship within their work, and there's so many interesting things. But I just wanted a broader approach to it today. But again, even we'll be here for 7 hours.
Exactly. Yeah. Honestly, to go through all of his films, a long list of filmography, I think. Yeah, it's great to keep to. Like Nolan likes this himself. He likes to keep to the story, the general arc of the story, and the general points of how that story is conveyed. And I think we've been able to do that. But overall, I'm just I've really enjoyed coming on, and going from Westworld to this, it's been a pleasure to talk so far about some directors and some great shows and movies with you. So thank you, Justin, once again for getting me on. I always enjoy it, and yeah. Come check me out if you want to see any, Tenet videos, and we've got a Christopher Nolan marathon kicking off in June. So, if you want to check out any of that, come check me out on YouTube at Cortex Videos. But also stay subscribed to this man here, Justin at Top Shelf Fandom, because he does some great work.
Yeah, don't leave me, guys.
Shows. Yeah, you do some great work over there with all the shows you cover and certain films. And I think this idea you've got for directors, one every week, it's a really great idea. I mean, I'm a big directors fan, auteurs in particular, as we've been talking about Nolan. So I think you're doing a great job with all the content you do. So
Well, thank you.
keep it up.
Yeah, I will. I will try. I will certainly try. And it's been a blast. I mean, you share the same interests, and you have so much knowledge. I'm so happy to find somebody that's got a balanced perspective as you do. And we're gonna keep doing these, like I said, and we're gonna be diving back in because where I am weak, you are strong, my friend. The Dune content that you got coming. I know a lot of my subscribers are into Dune. I am not informed enough to cover it, so I am not going to. And you got it covered, and that's why you're going to be coming back to talk about it.
I'm currently reading it, so I'm really
it.
enjoying it so far. It's a great book, so
we got you covered as a team. We got you covered. So and we'll have you back every 4 episodes until we run out of good filmmakers. I think that it'll be a summer long thing though, for sure. So make sure to subscribe. I did start a new channel. The official launch of that channel has been moved to Wednesday because I ordered a new webcam using the money I got from Patreon. Thank you guys. So I could shoot in 1080p and my resolution that gets here tomorrow. So I'm finishing that. That is going to be about how to best go about finding editing software if you are a content creator yourself, whether or not you're on Twitch or YouTube or you just like making videos. I will point you in the right direction. Avoid all the mistakes I've made as a content creator. It's like reading a biography. You want to read about other people's mistakes to avoid them. So I've worked with some of the best on the platform and am looking to share my wealth of knowledge on the other channel, Content Explained. So how to actually have practical advice that's going to do something for you about how to get a bigger base and a higher quality of content, not just don't break the rules of YouTube like I've seen for some of these people that are telling you. It's like awesome tips, bro. So can't thank you guys enough, can't thank John enough. Subscribe, and we will